Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Offbit. My name's Dan Lopez and today we're going to be looking at the Ryzen 5 2600. Now in recent months I've noticed how cheap it is to grab these Ryzen 5 2600 CPUs on secondhand markets. Now today we're going to be building a budget system with a Ryzen 5 2600. Now it's not going to be the fastest system out there, but for bang for buck it's going to do a great job, and we're going to be building this for my brother. So stick around and find out how well the Ryzen 5 2600 goes with our budget build today. The Ryzen 5 2600 was released on the 19th of April in 2018, costing a budget friendly of $199 US on release. Today you can find these CPUs as cheap as $50 USD, which is about 70 bucks Australian. The Ryzen 5 2600 is a 6-core 12-threaded beast with a clock-based speed of 3.4 GHz and is able to boost up to 3.9 GHz. This CPU has a stock TDP of 65 watts and is not a bad little CPU for modern gaming. The motherboard we're using today is the Asus Prime B350M-A. Now this motherboard we picked up for $20 Australian, which is about 7 bucks USD. Not a bad price at all when you can find them cheap. Now this motherboard comes with 4 DIMM slots and still has the standard overclocking options that come with all B350 motherboards. Other than that, there's nothing special about this board. It is basically a base model board. The board does not come with any heat sinks for the VRMs, so don't expect too much from them. The GPU we're running today is our old 4GB Asus Strix GTX 970 CU2. The GTX 970 cards are becoming a bit old in the tooth, but still very much capable of playing many of games well with 1080 resolutions. Today all the games we'll be playing will be in 1080p, so you'll just see how well this will perform. Now we're going to put this hardware all into this case that we've picked up very cheap at a local dump shop. So for $20 Australian, we also got not just the case, but we also picked up the power supply, 650 watt power supply that came with it, which is going to be great for this build. Now, top tip when building PCs, don't build them sitting up. We only did this for the camera, and trust me, it is a lot harder than it looks to do. So build it flat on a table, and it's always a good idea to put the CPU and RAM in the motherboard before you put it in the case. We've applied some heatsink compound straight to the CPU, and we're getting it ready to put in the new CPU cooler. The RAM we're using today is the Kingston HyperX DDR4. This RAM is designed to be ran at 2400. However, we've overclocked this RAM to 2.666 GHz, and this is in a 2x4 gig kit, which gives us a total of 8 gig of DDR4 RAM. Finally, we're going to put our GTX 970 into the motherboard. The drives we're using today on this system are, first off, we have a 256 A55 SSD from SP. This drive we'll be using for our operating system and does have a game or two on it. The other A55 SP drive that we're using today is a 512 gig, and that's for most of our games. We also have got an old magnetic Western Digital Green 1TB drive for some of those older games or the games that don't need a massive big data throughput to run. We're running Windows 10 x64 build 1904. Now, let's go and check out how well this system performs in our benchmarks. The Ryzen 5 2600 and 7-zip gave pretty respectable scores for both single and multi-threaded tasks, sitting behind the more modern i5 11400F and tasseled with the i7 6700K with its benchmarks. In CPU ID, the benchmarks show very similar results to the 7-zip scores, and once again sitting behind the 11400F by about the same margin. In Cinebench, the multi-core score sat nicely in front of all the other 4-core i7 CPUs, but we did sit back from the more modern i5 11400F. I really do think this CPU does give great performance for its value, both now and when they first came out, depending on the price that you get them secondhand at the moment, of course. With the GTX 970 combined with our Ryzen 5 2600, we sat around 110 frames per second in Cinebench, which is just behind the i7 with the GTX 770. Something I find strange, but we do see some strange scores at times in Cinebench GPU tests, but still quite a respectable score overall. In Unigine Heaven, we were beaten by the old i7 3930K with the exact same video card, as well as the GTX 770 with the i7 4th Gen. Once again, some strange scores, but we do see that from time to time in Unigine Heaven as well. However, in Firestrike, we saw the GTX 970 with the Ryzen 5 2600 system pull out in front. This benchmark, I feel, always shows a more better resemblance of the true performance of what's going on with the video cards in these systems. The first game we ran was Fortnite. We ran Fortnite on low detail settings at 1920 by 1080p resolution. Season 5 Fortnite ran great on this system. We could see very clearly with our low settings for the details for this game, and the game did maintain about 59-60 frames per second while we're playing, which is perfect for a low-end system and something that is actual competitive for playing games like Fortnite. Now the frame rates for Fortnite Season 5, our average frame rate hit 59.1 frames per second, minimum frame rate hit 26.9 frames per second, our maximum frame rate hit 62.2 frames per second, and our 0.1% lows was at 7.5 frames per second. Now we did have a 60 FPS limit set in the Fortnite settings, so there's definitely more headroom if you want to up the graphics on this game. So other than that, this game ran perfectly fine on this system. Next up, we tried our hand at Red Dead Redemption 2 on this system. We ran Red Dead Redemption 2 at low settings with a resolution of 1920 by 1080. The game did run well enough on this system to play. However, the frame rate liked to sit around 30 to 40 frames per second, which really, in my books, is not ideal. But still, it was consistent enough to give the game a playable feel. Now, our frame rates for Red Dead Redemption 2 on the Ryzen 5 with the GTX 970, we got an average frame rate of 33.1 frames per second. Our minimum frame rates hit 19.4 frames per second, and our maximum frame rates did hit 60.2 frames per second. Our 0.1% lows hit 5.3 frames per second. Couple of things we want to talk about with Red Dead Redemption 2 in this system. Now, we did run into a few problems with this game, one of which is the hackers or the modders that are online. As we can see, a flame coming out of some random guy. The other thing was with low memory. So, if you're wanting to play Red Dead Redemption 2, we'd recommend using more than 8GB of RAM, as it did bring up a couple of memory errors here and there, saying the system didn't have enough memory to run the map. Other thing we'd like to say, the CPU really did not struggle playing Red Dead Redemption 2. It had a lot more headroom left, but the GPU really could use quite an upgrade, since it only delivered us about 30 to 40 frames per second, which gave us an average of 33.1 frames per second on our benchmarks. So to make full use of the CPU, you probably need to grab a better GPU with a lot more grunt. Other than that, this game was quite playable on this system, and it could be done. Lately I've been playing a bit of Valheim. This is quite a fun and hard survival game to play, and I'd recommend this game if you are into survival-like genre. Now, we played Valheim at 1920 by 1080 at medium settings. The Ryzen 5 did not even break a sweat with this game. Most of the time, it barely utilised the CPU. However, the GTX 970 seemed to play quite well at this game, with these settings giving us little issues during our gameplay. Now, the frame rates for Valheim was an average frame rate of 65.1 frames per second. Our minimum frame rate hit 15.8 frames per second, and our maximum frame rate hit 141 frames per second. The 0.1% lows did hit a 1.3 frames per second, which is a bit low considering how much the CPU was pretty much free and available. But other than that, that was just a bit of load lag here and there, but for the most of it, this game played great on this system. Once again, we jump back into the benchmark of all survival games in my book, Minecraft. We ran Minecraft Bedrock Edition at high details with a resolution of 1920 by 1080. Once again, this game gave us silky smooth gameplay on this setup, and so it should, because it is very much well spec'd for this game. The great thing about the newer version of Minecraft is its ability to use all the threads, enabling more of the chunks in the world to load in quicker. So having a 12-threaded CPU in Minecraft does make a difference. Now, the average frame rates for Minecraft Bedrock Edition for Windows 10, we had an average frame rate of 59.8 frames per second. The minimum frame rate hit 5.8 frames per second, and our maximum frame rate hit 60.5 frames per second. Our 0.1% lows hit 22.9 frames per second. Now, the game benchmarks did show a minimum frame rate that felt pretty low, but for most of it, it ran quite well, which is reflected in the 1% low frame rates and the 0.1% low frame rates. So we can ignore that minimum frame rate of 5.8 frames per second. Now, like we said at the start, this game ran silky smooth with the settings we used in Minecraft. The final game we had today, we ran on the system, was a more modern title. This, of course, is Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2. Now, we ran Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 at 1920 by 1080 with low to medium settings. This game really ran great on this system, and it is a really fun and immersive game in my account anyway. The Ryzen 5 had a heap of headroom left, and the GPU seemed to be well matched for our setup with our settings in this game. Now, the frame rates for Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, we had an average frame rate of 61.9 frames per second. The minimum frame rate hit 33.7 frames per second, and our maximum frame rates hit a whopping 126.9 frames per second. Our 0.1% lows gave us a healthy 22.9 frames per second on this system. Once again, this game runs great on this machine, and if you're okay playing with a 1920 by 1080 resolution, we can recommend this game and this system for you to play. Now, summing up this system. This case we bought on the cheap from a dump shop with a good power supply, which really is a strike of luck. Also adding in our second-hand DDR4 RAM we picked up for 20 bucks Australian, and also we picked up a motherboard for another 20 bucks. 3 really good deals that can't always be found. Now, the Ryzen 5 2600 CPU can be picked up as little as 70 bucks Australian on second-hand markets. You should be able to get an SSD, if you don't have one already, for about 50 bucks Australian, which will be a 512 gig drive. Now, throw in the GTX 970, which can be found second-hand for about 100 bucks to 150 bucks Australian, and you have a cheap, capable system for about 260 bucks Australian, or about 184 US dollars. Though do remember, we did luck out with the purchase of the case and the PSU and the motherboard. These were all great pickups for the price. But those who are looking for a cheap build, or maybe you want to build a second PC that you upgraded because your main AMD system, you went to the 5000 series CPU. This is actually quite a nice path for you guys. This really is a great little system, and we could marry it up with a few other parts to get even better performance, such using the GTX 1060 or better, or go into the Ryzen 5 3600, which also can be purchased around the same price secondhand, and we do recommend maybe looking at them first before approaching the Ryzen 5 2600. Well, once again, we've come to the end of our video. Now, we have brought up a brand new webpage for you guys to check out. We've put a few little tools, such as the GPU PCU calculator, and all our videos there. So go and check that out. We've got the web link down below. So I want to thank our Patreon supporters for their support. And if you haven't subscribed, please hit that subscribe button. If you like this video, also hit that like button. Thank you once again from The Offbit, and we'll catch you guys next time on The Offbit.